So let's talk about how the budget gets made. All political actors have a stake in the budget. They try and tie their budget needs to national and political needs. So if you want something, either because you've been lobbied to get it or maybe it's important to your district, you're going to go out there and you're not going to say, a big lobbyist paid a bunch of money to get this tax break, or my district really needs you to keep producing this military thing that we don't need because there's a lot of jobs in my district, which incidentally happens all the time. You try to make some broader argument. When I say you, I mean the congressman. Tries to make some broader argument about why it's necessary. A great example of this is a jet that we produce now. And for every jet that we produce, we build 2 engines. We don't need 2 engines. The military has told us to stop doing this. They don't need the engines. But those engines happen to be built, that second engine happens to be built in a very powerful member of Congress's districts. For example, the House Majority Leader right now, I'm sorry, the Speaker of the House, excuse me, John Boehner, his district in Cincinnati is one of the places where they build this engine. So every time the budget comes around, he has to go out there and fight to keep this engine being built, even though we have no need for it. And of course, he talks about national security, and if we only had 1 engine for this plane, if we didn't have a backup engine, we would, I don't know, get taken over by communists or something. There's lots of players with the President and Congress playing important roles. Almost all committees are involved in the budget. The President originally played a limited role in the budget, but now budget requests are directed to the office of the OMB and the President before going to Congress. The budget process is time-consuming, and they start nearly a year in advance. The OMB, the President and the agencies negotiate budget requests. The President proposes a budget, and then Congress usually fights over that and changes that. Here you will see a timeline. And so you see in the spring the budget policy begins to be developed. And in the summer the agencies submit estimates on what they're going to need. In the fall the estimates are reviewed. And in the winter the President submits his budget to Congress, and then Congress begins fighting over it. The Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, an act designed to reform the congressional budgetary process. This actually was brought about by Nixon, who opposed a lot of the New Deal and the Great Society programs of FDR and LBJ. Didn't like these programs to help the poor. He thought this was, unnecessary handouts, and he refused to allocate the money. Nixon, he called it impounding, and so instead of giving out food stamp money or unemployment insurance and things like this, he just kept the money. Not he personally, he just kept it in the budget and refused to allocate the money. And so Congress had to reform this process in order to force the President to spend the money that got allocated. But it also fixed the budget calendar. It created a budget committee in the House and the Senate, and created the Congressional Budget Office, which advises Congress on the probable consequences of its decisions, forecast revenues, and is a counterweight to the Office of Management and Budget. And so when policies are proposed, when budgets are proposed, these 2 offices estimate how much money will this bring in, how much money will it cost. And they're generally nonpartisan. They generally do a good job. Well, I should say they generally do a fair job. Their estimates are frequently wrong. The budget is considered as a whole. We don't look at individual items, because then what you'll do is you'll spend everything and take in no money. A budget resolution binds Congress to a bottom line for the budget before Congress considers what it's going to spend, or what exactly it's going to spend on. That's called appropriations. The current budget is then reconciled, which means that you may finalize the budget and then say, oh, we've spent too much, and then you have to go back and cut it other places. Then the new budget is authorized and appropriated, and this is a bill that has to be passed through Congress. We've had times recently where Congress has refused to pass a budget. Twice in the 90s, while Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House and Bill Clinton was President, Gingrich's House failed to pass a budget entirely and shut the government down, which you may remember discussing in your U.S. history class. Anyway, you can pause and look at this. Here are some timetables, some kind of nuts and bolts stuff. Between 74 and 98, every budget was a deficit budget, meaning we spent more than we brought in. Congress almost always misses its deadlines. And Congress passes continuing resolutions to keep the budget going until it passes, to keep the government going until it passes a budget, although they refused to do this twice in the 90s. The omnibus budget bill often contains policies that cannot pass on their own, meaning that things get shoved in there. Amendments are added to it because they wouldn't pass unless they were part of the entire budget. We see here the deficits rising and falling. You see Clinton actually getting the deficit to zero, actually creating a surplus in late in his term here. And you see the explosions of the deficit under Reagan and Bush and the second Bush here. Congress has passed bills to try and control the deficits, although they failed. Congress, often politicians run for office and are who have been in office for years claim that they're going to cut spending and balance the budget and make it all better, but quite frankly, they rarely ever do. Economic downturns, of course, play havoc with the budget because it decreases how much we take in taxes, while at the same time increasing how much we spend on programs to help the poor, which will knock the budget right out of whack. So one of the reasons the budget got balanced in the late 90s is the economy was doing great. If the economy is doing great, tax revenue goes up, expenditures for social programs go down, and we end up with a surplus. Right now, the budget is way out of balance because of the economic collapse in the fall of 2008 at the end of the Bush administration.